Did you know that Lewis Hamilton could have finished in the points in Brazil if it hadn't been for invisible damage that destroyed his performance lap after lap? How many downforce points did you lose exactly? And how did that damage really affect your car compared to other similar incidents? The answer is more brutal than you imagine. On Saturday, qualifying was a disaster foretold. Hamilton was eliminated prematurely in SQ2. Traction problems when leaving Juancao, turn 12, prevented him from improving his time just when the track grip was optimal. I would start from 13th position. Total frustration. While Charles Leclerc managed to get into Q3, the 7-time champion was trapped in traffic and a poor tire strategy. But the worst thing was not the position itself, but the environment. Starting in the middle of the pack in Brazil with a narrow and downhill turn 1 is like playing Russian roulette. And Hamilton knew it. As Sunday arrived, the weather seemed benign, but the atmosphere in the Ferrari garage was dense. From the pit wall they knew that any progress in the race would depend on a clean first lap. The plan was clear. Avoid risks, gain 2 or 3 positions conservatively and execute an aggressive undercut against the Alpine and Aston Martin. But everything collapsed as soon as the lights went out. At the start, Hamilton started well. His reaction was precise, and for a few meters it seemed that he would manage to avoid the chaos. But then the first blow came. Carlos Sainz, now at Williams, miscalculated his braking and touched the side of the SF25. A brief contact, but enough to damage the floor of the car, right in the most critical area for generating ground effect. The damage was invisible to the naked eye, but sensors were already beginning to alert the team to a loss in performance. The car began to lose charge from the first minute, and when it seemed that the situation could be stabilized, total tragedy occurred. At the end of that same lap, Hamilton, driven by the urgency to regain positions, went for a risky overtake on Franco Colapinto in turn 15. In theory, it was a feasible maneuver. Colapinto had lost traction in the previous turn and looked like easy prey, but the margin was minimal. Hamilton attempted to change lanes at high speed. Colapinto also moved and contact was inevitable. The SF25 swallowed the Alpine's rear wheel and destroyed its front wing. But that was not all. Fragments of carbon became embedded under the flat bottom of the car, damaging key areas of the diffuser and generating internal turbulence. The steering began to feel heavier, the car reacted with delay and quick changes of direction, and most critically, braking stability was compromised. In seconds, the car was no longer competitive. It was a broken shell with a Ferrari silhouette. Hamilton's frustration was immediately reflected on the radio. "These guys are a joke," was his reaction when he was informed of the 5-second penalty for the incident with Colapinto. But that phrase hid more than anger over a penalty. It was the cry of a driver who felt that the car was betraying him, that the dream of his tribute to Senna had become a cruel mockery of fate. What should have been his declaration of intent as a Ferrari driver became a devastating message. The SF25 was not yet up to par, and not even a talent like Hamilton could save it from itself. This first act is not just the introduction of an accident. It is the exact portrait of how modern F1 punishes every centimeter, every thousandth, and every decision. And for Hamilton, it was the most painful confirmation. In 2025, nothing would be easy. What happened on that first lap didn't stop at the dramatic image of Hamilton's wing flying through the air or the flurry of carbon fibers scattered on the asphalt. The true dimension of the disaster began to take shape inside the paddock minutes later, when Ferrari engineers, still under the safety car protocol, began analyzing the telemetry data. What they saw on the screen was not a damaged car. It was a car that had completely collapsed in its aerodynamic functionality. From the outside, the SF25 still looked whole after replacing the spoiler in the pits. But internally, the systems were beginning to send warning signals. The rear tire temperatures were unstable, the pressure sensors on the flat bottom reported fluctuations, and the vertical load distribution graphs presented a completely anomalous asymmetry. In a category where every tenth of a second costs millions, the phrase that Fred Vasseur uttered in the press conference after the Brazilian GP was like a bomb. We lost between 35 and 40 points of downforce. That figure is not a narrative exaggeration. It is a competitive sentence. Because in the internal language of Formula 1, every 10 points of downforce can mean between 0.3 and 0.4 seconds per lap, depending on the circuit. Brazil is a track with high and medium speed curves, where cornering depends critically on the grip generated by the flat bottom, the diffuser, and the front wing. Hamilton, from that moment, was out of the race. The car he was driving no longer responded to the design philosophy for which it had been built. The SF25 had been tuned to have neutral balance, but was now an unpredictable animal. It behaved as if it had less load on the rear axle than on the front, which made Hamilton have to fight with oversteer in slow corners and understeer in fast ones, a dilemma impossible to solve without a complete new setup. Something unfeasible in the middle of the race. And the most devastating thing is that this was not a new phenomenon for Ferrari. There was a painful precedent. At the Canadian Grand Prix that same season, Hamilton hit a groundhog in the middle of the straight. The apparently minor impact pierced the floor of the car and caused a loss of 20 points of downforce. The result? Half a second per lap lost, confirmed by telemetry, simulations and direct comparisons with Leclerc's performance that day. Still, Hamilton managed to finish 6th, despite the damage. But in Brazil the situation was much worse. We are talking about almost double the aerodynamic loss, with an impact distributed in multiple areas. The bottom, the diffuser, the splitter, and even the lateral vortices that control the airflow under the car. All of that was damaged. The load was no longer uniform. Aerodynamic efficiency completely disintegrated. During the race, Hamilton's radio feedback became increasingly sharp. He complained about the lack of stability when braking, that he could not apply power when exiting curves without the car sliding, that the rear axle moved uncontrollably in curves like Decided do Lago and Bico de Pato. On a technical level, the car suffered from what engineers call non-recoverable dysfunctional aerodynamics, a condition that cannot be corrected on the track, only in the factory. Furthermore, Ferrari's decision not to retire the car and continue the race only served to expose it to more structural stress. But from a media and psychological point of view, it had value, demonstrating resilience. However, for a driver like Hamilton, racing a car that can't compete is like playing a symphony with a broken violin. You know the score, you know every note, but the instrument doesn't respond. It is emotional torture disguised as professional effort. And for Ferrari engineers, it was a bitter lesson. The SF-25 proved to be highly sensitive to ground damage, much more so than expected at its conception. This would force the team to completely overhaul the floor architecture for the following Grands Prix, knowing that a single poorly positioned fragment can completely ruin airflow, balance and therefore the entire race strategy. After the accident on the first lap, the tactical chaos at Ferrari did not take long to become evident. With the safety car on the track and Hamilton's front wing in pieces, the team had to decide in seconds whether to call him to the pits or wait for a possible red flag. They opted for the most conservative solution. They took him in to change the spoiler, not yet knowing the severity of the damage hidden under the car. But what should have been a standard repair turned into a nightmarish diagnosis. The mechanics not only removed the destroyed spoiler, they also had to clean carbon residue trapped under the flat bottom, which unnecessarily extended the stop. In total, Hamilton's stop was more than 3 seconds slower than average for that type of gear, and that in Formula One is equivalent to losing an eternity. Rejoining the back of the peloton was only the first problem. The real drama was that, despite the change, the car no longer had a solution. From the pit wall, Hamilton's strategy director and race engineer were simultaneously reviewing pace projections. The data was brutal. The car was turning at the pace of the teams at the back of the grid, unable to even get close to the times of the Alpine, not to mention Williams or Aston Martin. The simulation models immediately ruled out any points option. The best projection indicated a P14 as the most likely result, without any more errors being made on the track. At a strategic level, Ferrari was trapped in a dead-end dilemma. If they kept Hamilton on the track, they risked unnecessarily draining the car's resources, stressing key components, and at the same time, putting the driver in a frustrating situation. But if they withdrew it, they would send a message of technical weakness and demotivation in a race where the other car, Charles Leclerc's, was still in competition. The team image had to be sustained, even if the cost was emotional for its new star. Hamilton, for his part, did not need to see the data. I felt it in every curve, in every braking, in every attempt to accelerate at the exit of Decided do Lago. I knew something deeper than the spoiler was broken. His radio voice became colder, sharper. His communication style, normally meticulous and calm, transformed into bursts of frustration. I have no grip. Nothing. The car doesn't turn. It doesn't traction. It's destroyed. But it was his comment after the penalty that marked a turning point. These guys are a joke. It was not a random phrase. It was an expression loaded with meaning, directed not only at the commissioners, but at the entire ecosystem of erratic decisions that had marked their weekend. It was a message that showed that the pilot was not only upset by the punishment, but completely disenchanted with the treatment received by the system in general. It was the voice of someone who felt like they were in enemy land. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.